production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Juvenile justice in Memphis tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian. Thanks for joining us. I am joined tonight by Josh Spickler, Executive Director of Just City, which advocates for criminal justice reform in Memphis and Tennessee. Thanks for being here again.
Thanks, Eric.
Along with Bill Dries, reporter with the Daily Memphian. We wanted to have you on, Josh, and we actually invited Judge Michael from the Dan Michael from the Juvenile Justice Center, Juvenile Court, to be here as well. He could not be here, but we'll try to get him on in the future because of some data I think came out of your organization about a 15% increase in the number of Shelby County juveniles being transferred from juvenile court into adult court. A vast majority of them were African-American youths who were transferred, and we'll get into the data and talk about that. This comes some year and a half after the Federal Department of Justice monitoring of juvenile justice court was ended. So let's talk about what those numbers are and dig into them. And again, you are on one side of this issue, and so Bill and I will definitely, kind of channel the other side as we go through this. And as I said, we'll try to get, we'll also reach out to Amy Wyrick because her office is at the district attorney is involved with this issue as well. But what did the numbers say to you?
Yeah, and I don't know if there are sides to this issue. I mean, what we were hoping to get started in this community is a conversation about numbers, about data, about facts. And the facts are, as far as we can tell, we still have not heard from the court in terms of confirmation of this information, but what we saw were anywhere from 86, the district attorney's office reports 90 children were transferred during 2019 to be treated as adults in adult court. By our measure, none of those children are white, all but one were black, one was Hispanic. And so by any measure, by anyone's assessment of that, I think it's a problem. And so that's what we hoped to get into the community for a conversation, is that a year plus after the Department of Justice oversight ended, oversight that began because of allegations that children were treated differently based on race. Here we are again with, it looks like every child who was transferred being a child of color. I have so many questions, so we'll just try to start breaking down. What is the alternative? I mean, because what the court has generally said in the past is these are very violent offenses. Right. I think Amy Wyrick, the district attorney, came out and said, what was it? In each of the last 3 years, there were over 600 serious violent crimes, murder, rape, robbery, and kidnapping committed in Shelby County by Shelby County juveniles against Shelby County victims. And so we can't go one-to-one in terms of those crimes and these 90 children. But the trend of violent criminals being put into adult court, what's the alternative when someone who is a teenager has committed murder, has committed kidnapping, has committed rape or robbery? Right, and that response suggests an argument that we've heard repeatedly from the district attorney and from the court that for some reason things are different in Shelby County, that we are more violent, that our children are somehow different and perhaps more dangerous than children from across the state. Because at the same time as we release this data that we have about transfers from 2019, Nashville, the court there, released their data to the media in Nashville, as they do every January. And in a city that actually last year had a spike in crime associated with youth, transferred 16 children last year. And so over the same 3-year period, Nashville transferred 37 people. And they also released data about criminal activity involving youth. And it shows that there are a lot of children in Nashville, hundreds every year, getting in trouble for the same types of offenses that the district attorney points out, violent, frightening offenses. And yet Nashville finds a way. Nashville finds an alternative. This is not about different children. This is about a different way of treating children. And that's what we're trying to point out. We're not Nashville. Their solutions won't work for us, but they're finding another way, and we need to find another way.
Let me bring Bill in.
Josh, prior to these statistics, Michael Rawlings, the director of the Memphis Police Department, had told the council, I believe it was as long ago as a year ago, that police were arresting more juveniles. Was that a precursor to what you saw in these numbers? Or is that something separate altogether?
No, I think probably it is. I mean, I think it makes sense that if the police are bringing more youth to the juvenile justice system, and the juvenile justice system reacts the way it sort of always has here in Shelby County, then we will see more children transferred. So I think, yes, I mean, I don't have a lot of detail about the police data and what those children are being brought to the court for, but I'm not surprised at all that a court that worked very hard to end oversight, to end accountability for these things, I'm not surprised at all that court then transferred more children than it did the year before.
Mm-hmm. I think most people who don't work with this every day or look at this every day may think, well, wait, I thought that the county commission had set up a center that was an alternative to doing this for most juveniles. I thought that there was a new detention center on the way. Are those things that can help with this decision that the court makes?
Right. Well, I think that the primary thing that could help with the decision the court makes, and it's one that the court points to quite often, frankly, is the lack of resources for children on the upper end of that spectrum, on the spectrum of violent crime, of crime that is truly frightening and truly dangerous to the community. The resources for the court are limited, and that's a state function. I mean, the state has closed secure facilities for youth. There is not a lot of space for children like that. Now, it should be the last thing that we think about. It should be our last option to lock a child up as if an adult, even if it's a youth facility. But there aren't resources like that available to the court. But that's true across the state, and our rate of treating children as adults continues to far outpace other cities in this state. I mean, Nashville, compared to Nashville again, 7 times more children transferred. I get that we're different communities, but that disparity is not explained by lack of resources. It's explained by the way we see children.
And so it's not explained. I think a lot of people would say, well, yeah, I mean, we have a 60% African American population. We have much higher rates of poverty. Right. That is the equalizer in the math that would say we would have more than Nashville. But it's not, right. You're saying.
Right. I mean, 7 times. I mean, that's not, you can't make up for that with economics, with demographics, with population.
Maybe even moving away, because you do a lot you're involved in looking at criminal justice reform nationally. And there's almost a strange distraction because of the Memphis-Nashville competition. And you see it in the comments on sites, like you just see it. People get they kind of almost lose sight of the ball because there's such competition between Memphis and Nashville. So what is cities around the country that do it right from your point of view, when in handling violent, and we'll get to talking about petty offenses and all that, okay? We're talking about violent offenses, really difficult, hard, horrible things. What courts, what cities do it right?
Right, well, again, it goes to the state. I mean, there have been bills, there is legislation that will probably come up this year. We just started our legislative session. Criminal justice and youth justice is always on the table there, that give courts, or actually require courts to consider the age of the accused. And so I think it starts there. I think it starts, and we don't have that. Once a child turns 18, he or she is off to the adult system. That probably needs to be a higher number, more than 18 years old. What we know about brain science now, about the development of the brain in particular, that we didn't know when we wrote that law, is that the brain is not fully formed, not finished growing and developing until well into the 20s, especially for boys. And so it starts with legislation that mandates that courts, both juvenile court judges and adult criminal court judges, consider the brain development of a child and the circumstances that brought the child to the court. So that's part of it. I mean, and then that happens in many states. And again, there's legislation that we can pass in Tennessee that fixes that problem going forward.
So, but I think one question people have is say, okay, give you that they should not go into the adult court. Nonetheless, this is a hypothetical. It's just easier to do this as a hypothetical. So, because take an extreme example, someone who's committed murder, it's done, it's happened. You are not here advocating that child go free.
Of course not.
Okay, so let's walk through where is that alternative path for someone, again, hypothetically, let's jump to the conclusion that they are guilty. What is the right process and outcome for that child?
Right, and I think, again, it goes back to a consideration of what brought that child to the allegation of murder, right? Where did that child come from? What trauma is that child suffering from? These crimes are terrible and violent, and there are victims, and there must be accountability. Absolutely. No one is saying that children who are charged with crimes like this should just be let out when they turn 18. And again, sometimes transfer, in Tennessee especially, is the only option. It is the only thing. And that's why we see courts across the state transferring children. But it should be the absolute last option, because it puts a child on a path from which that child will never return. The adult system, we know, has few approaches that work for children. Detaining children in detention, creates a pathway that is much, much different.
For lower level offenses.
Well, for both. But so to your question about violent crimes, frankly, there probably ought to be things that we can do beyond the age of 18 that aren't fully adult sentences, that aren't fully adult treatment. We don't have that. And again, that's a state issue. And so, but again, I don't want to let this court in Shelby County off the hook, because that is true of every jurisdiction in this state. And many, many other places are finding ways to only use the ultimate option of transfer and the ultimate sanction of adult sentencing for the very few most violent cases. We're doing it for a vast number of cases.
Bill.
So the idea of a juvenile sentence or some kind of juvenile court solution to this beyond the age of 18 is something that Bill Gibbons has talked about at the Crime Commission, and he's been criticized because critics of the system in general are saying, oh, so you want to keep them in juvenile detention past the age of 18. It's kind of a double-edged sword, isn't it?
Well, it can be, I suppose. And this idea of a blended approach between the ages of, 13, 14, however young children are when they're brought in these days, to 26, 27, 28 years old, is not a bad idea. I think the problem that advocates like myself, and probably me in the past when this has been discussed, is that a court that does not answer questions from the media, that is not accountable to the data that come out, is not responsive to the community's or the Department of Justice's demands that they do things to fix these problems. I don't want that court in charge of a child past his 18th birthday. We're not doing the policy right now. I don't want those people and those systems to be involved in something that does go on into someone's 20s. But I do think that it's a very likely and positive possibility if we can get actors at the table who are working in the best interests of these children.
Would there be a lot of conditions in the state law that would make that possible?
It would have to change significantly, yes. We would have to reform the law and write the law very differently than it's written now.
The other point on this is that what was the number before this whole discussion and this whole movement and acknowledgement publicly that too many children are transferred as adults? What were the numbers that juvenile court here was transferring on an annual basis?
So, the numbers before the Department of Justice arrived were very, very large. So we should, to credit this community, we should say that the numbers are smaller than they used to be, for sure. But they are still, again, way, way, way out of line with many other parts of with every other part of the state, frankly. We are an outlier.
They were, according to an article in Daily Memphian, the transfers were 78 in 2018, up to 90 in 2019. In 2017, it was 92. So we've been in this 80-ish average over the last 3 years.
And I think we were doing over 100.
Well over, and we got down
pre-monitor.
We got down to 47, I believe, in the middle of the DOJ
right.
oversight a few years ago. But it's been slowly creeping up since the Department of Justice ended.
So do you think that's because the Department of Justice is not in that watchdog position?
I think that is a part of it, and I think that every report we got during that oversight, including the final reports that we got about a year ago from the Equal Protection Monitor and the Due Process Monitor, basically predicted this. They said that the equal protection problems are just as significant as they were when this started, and the Due Process Monitor was very clear about the way children are represented and the fairness of the procedure that children get in that court. And those monitors pointed toward that impact on transfer specifically. And what we're seeing is, not a reduction, but in fact a slight increase over the year before in transfer. And
Yeah, let me also say, as anyone joining the show late, we've reached out to Judge Dan Michael at the juvenile court to get him on the show. He could not be here today. We will ask him to come on. He was on, I think, a year and a half ago. We'll also try to get DA Wyrick on in a show very soon to talk about some of these issues. We've also got Floyd Bonner, the sheriff, and the sheriff is involved in these issues in terms of the security and oversight of the adult jail and the juvenile jail, right? They provide the...
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
So we'll do all that over time as we go through here. I do think it's worth noting that one of the last monitor reports that DOJ monitors found, and this gets into the racial dynamics that you're talking about, which black youth facing the same charges and with a similar criminal history as a white youth were 4 times as likely to be brought to the court by law enforcement, twice as likely to be detained, twice as likely to have petitions filed by the court, and less likely to be diverted from the court, which gets into the racial bias that the independent DOJ monitor found. Also, another of the monitors said in the final report about the juvenile court that it allowed, quote, blatantly unfair hearing practices that limited defense attorneys, impeded due process through a constellation of other practices, and that the juvenile court was engaged in and fostered a culture of intimidation against juvenile defense attorneys. And again, we will try to get Judge Dan Michael to come on and talk about that was what the monitor was finding when they were there. He declared mission accomplished when they left, and that there was a change. Another stat, another number in this, that all this stuff is sad and difficult, right? That I think in when the Crime Commission numbers came out at some point recently, that overall violent crime was roughly, stable, for lack of a better word, in Memphis and Shelby County, but crimes by juveniles was up something like 50 or 60%. Those crimes going into the juvenile court, doesn't that just drive the volume into the court that, independent of the way in which youths are handled once they hit that court? If crime is up 60% among juveniles, there's going to be some kind of spike in the activity at juvenile court.
Of course, I think that makes sense. And to Bill's question earlier about the police bringing more children, it's the same idea, right? The police are the responders to these violent events, and they are bringing more children in, according to the reporting and according to the data from the police department. And so, yes, it would, again, when we have a system that treats children differently, not when we have different children, but when we have a system that treats the children so differently from any other system in the state, of course, we're going to see more transfers, and we're seeing it. We're seeing it.
As of, I think this morning, we're taping on Thursday, we have a story in the Daily Memphian that the county is starting to look at a former prison in southeast Shelby County as an alternative to the county has acknowledged, the court has acknowledged they need to do something about the Juvenile Justice Center. It's an inadequate facility. The one down on Adams downtown. The county commission approved $1.5 million last year to, and Bill's going to check me where I get any of this wrong, to study whether a new facility should be built next to it or renovations to the existing facility. But now Floyd Bonner, among others, Bill, has brought up the prospect of using this existing facility down in southeast Shelby County. It might be less costly to renovate that than building a whole new one downtown.
Right. This is a story that Yolanda Jones and Linda Moore have worked on for quite some time and brought in. This is across the street from what many Memphians will know as Tall Trees, an old juvenile facility that's not a part of this, which is owned. This is the detention facility across the street that was owned by Core Civic, also known as Corrections Corporation of America. Josh, I believe this site has been mentioned before as a possibility, hasn't it?
It has. And what we're seeing, all of this is pointing to pressure on detention facilities, because even after children turn 18, especially when they're transferred, there's a requirement that we detain them, and then there's an even stricter requirement that we remove them from the presence of other children. So we have a growing population of now adults who were transferred as children to be tried as adults in detention. And those folks are currently held at Jail East. We think we have 40-something boys out there now who are awaiting their 18th birthdays, have already been transferred. And so that builds pressure on our facility at Jail East, which is primarily a women's facility. The detention facility on Adams, which holds children pre-transfer, that population faces pressures when we see spikes in alleged criminal behavior like this. And so, they're beginning to look for solutions to that. And as an advocate, I say that the solution that we should approach first and foremost is how we're treating children with the judicial process, not where we're going to house them. This warehousing mentality is going to lead us to old facilities that are awful and will need significant rehabilitation to be anywhere close to useful to us. But it's a warehousing mentality, and it's going to lead to these discussions of large capital expenditures for sure.
And the county commission's debate about this when the new commission and the new mayor took office revolved around specifically what size facility do we build or renovate. And one school of thought was, we build it big so that we always have room. The other school of thought was, if you build it big, the inclination is going to be to fill it up.
And they will, and I believe, of course, I believe they will fill it up. And we've already heard, the last time this conversation was happening, we already heard inklings that we would contract with surrounding counties. And you may recall this from your reporting. There was already a conversation with other counties. Well, even if we don't fill it, we'll get children from other counties to pay us. Those counties will pay us to warehouse their children. Possibly state funding. Then it becomes a revenue stream. And so building a larger facility should be a non-starter.
Are you, though, and I apologize if you already said this, are you in favor of some sort of renovation, renovation's a terrible word, some sort of improvement of the physical facility for juveniles who are held?
Well, absolutely. I mean, that building is very old, and I go in and out of it quite frequently. Actually, I was there last week, and then I was in an office part of the building, and it was very warm, and I commented to one of the staff, it's very warm in here. And she said, well, we have to make it so that the facility for the children is more comfortable, and that means it's hot in here. I mean, it's a really old and very difficult to maintain facility, so absolutely. But that conversation immediately goes to larger facilities and immediately leads to this idea that we're going to fill those beds, and however we do it, it's a warehousing mentality that we need to get rid of. And once we do, then we can talk, I think, and have a conversation about what renovations and what improvements need to be made.
With about 4 minutes left, you all at Just City work on other criminal justice issues, a whole range of them. It seems in the years that you've been around, even before that, the near 10 years we've been doing the show, the conversation about certain criminal justice issues has changed dramatically, both nationally but let's focus locally on things like expungement fees, which are the fees costs to get your criminal record cleared of minor offenses and misdemeanors and so on. There's more talk about bail reform now. There's talk about how what seemingly small fees for broken taillights or minor traffic offenses, lost licenses, how those add up. Do you feel that there is a shift in the conversation? Let's stick with the low-level offenses that clog the criminal justice system and really do hamper, I think the studies show again and again and again, once someone touches the criminal justice system, even with just a broken taillight, misses a court date, adds a fine, it's a downward spiral.
Absolutely.
Do you feel like there's a shift in that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's never going to satisfy me. It's never going to be a fast enough shift. But yes, absolutely. I think since we've been around, which is about 5 years now at Just City, we've definitely seen those things. Those, as you say, low end offenses that generally do nothing more than just build debt, financial debt, because we're not warehousing people who are charged with driving on suspended license. In fact, the district attorney has stopped prosecuting a large number of driving on suspended license charges that are a result of inability to pay, and that's a great move. And so that is just one example, and expungement has really caught on. There are a lot of programs in the community right now helping people get that record clear years after they've finished with all of their responsibilities. And so I feel like we have some momentum, and it's coming from all sectors. It's not just coming from advocates.
Much of this has to come from the state, right?
Absolutely.
Because the state sets these laws that the county then implements with some amount of latitude.
The state and local government, like the city mayor and the clerk's offices and the district attorney, those are all places where this idea is catching on.
Bill?
When we've seen some organizations, yours has been involved, I believe, in actually posting bail for people. This usually happens on the holidays, or do you do it? Are you able to do it on a more regular basis?
We do it year round. We do it in conjunction with lawyers from the Public Defender's Office. We have the Memphis Community Bail Fund. It's actually been around for more than 3 years. It's taken a while to really get going. We started the Memphis Community Bail Fund and the Nashville Community Bail Fund at the same time. The Nashville Community Bail Fund has since spun off into its own organization and continues to do really well. Bailed out more than 600 people now, I believe, up there. We've done it more than 100 times, and and it's a really great program. And what it proves is that money should have nothing to do with who's in our jail. It's an entire episode to talk about how we use our adult jail, and the way people find their way into that jail is generally through poverty. I mean, there are people who we don't want out of that jail, but the majority of the people in that jail are there because they can't afford to pay their way out. And so we are trying to prove that that shouldn't have anything to do with safety and returning to court.
Can't pay their way out from nonviolent offenses, you would say, or
well, both. But I mean, perhaps we don't want people to be able to pay their way out for violent offenses. But why would we put a price tag on that? Because if you're wealthy, you can also be violent.
These are bails of $100 to $200.
And it's just a nonsensical way of addressing someone's risk to the community, because a wealthy person can be dangerous. and so it makes no sense. What it does is it punishes poverty, and it punishes people before they're found guilty. Let's keep in mind, most everyone in that jail has not been found guilty of anything. And the low-level offenders in particular are sitting there because they can't come up with $100, $200, $300. Those are the people we're bailing out. And they come back to court over 90% of the time.
So is bail reform something that is a state issue?
Go ahead, quick answer.
It's partially state, but largely it has to do with our pretrial decisions that are made at a local level.
All right. We'll get you back. We'll talk about some of these other issues that we could only touch on at the end. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you, Bill. And thank you for joining us. Join us again next week.